They said Duke Adrian Blackthorne would destroy anyone foolish enough to approach him. They were right about the destruction, just wrong about who would be ruined. When Evelyn Carter accepted a dare to ask the most feared man in London to dance, she thought the worst he could do was refuse. She didn't know that one moment of reckless courage would ignite a scandal that would threaten everything he'd built, force impossible choices, and prove that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is tell the truth. Stay until the end to see how one dance changed everything, and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. The chandeliers of Ashford House blazed like captured stars, casting golden light across a sea of silk and jewels. Evelyn Carter stood at the edge of the ballroom, her fingers gripping her champagne glass so tightly she feared it might shatter. The music swelled, a waltz, elegant and merciless, while couples spun across the marble floor in perfect synchronization. She'd been in London for exactly 3 weeks, and already she understood the fundamental truth of high society. It was a battlefield dressed in lace. "Well," Caroline Pembroke's voice dripped with honeyed malice, "are you going to do it, or shall we all agree you're precisely as provincial as you appear?" Evelyn turned to face her tormentor. Caroline stood surrounded by her coterie of admirers, daughters of earls and viscounts who'd never worked a day in their lives, who'd been bred for this world of calculated cruelty and strategic marriages. Their faces were beautiful and cold, like porcelain masks hiding vipers. "I said I would." Evelyn's voice was steadier than she felt. "Then we're waiting." Lady Margaret Ashford, their hostess's daughter, examined her gloved nails with studied boredom. "Unless you've realized what a spectacular fool you'll make of yourself." The dare had been simple, really. Vicious, but simple. Ask the Duke of Blackthorne to dance, the man everyone whispered about, the man who'd attended tonight's ball alone and spoken to no one, the man who stood now in the far corner of the ballroom like a wolf surveying sheep. Even from across the room, his presence was overwhelming. Tall, dark-haired, with features that might have been handsome if they weren't so severe. "He'll refuse you," Caroline continued, her smile sharp. "He'll cut you dead in front of everyone. And then we'll all know exactly what you are, a little nobody from nowhere who thought she could play in our world." Evelyn had arrived in London with her aunt 3 weeks ago, an orphaned girl from a modest family in Yorkshire with nothing but a small inheritance and dreams too large for her circumstances. Her aunt, a distant relation who'd married well, had grudgingly agreed to sponsor her for a season. "One chance," Aunt Marguerite had said coldly. "Don't waste it on foolishness." This was definitely foolishness. But Evelyn had spent her entire life being underestimated, being told she was too plain, too poor, too clever for her own good. She'd learned to play the piano because no one thought she could master it. She'd read philosophy because young ladies weren't supposed to understand such things. And she'd survived the death of her parents and the loss of her home because everyone expected her to crumble. She was tired of proving herself, but she was even more tired of being invisible. "I'm going," she set down her glass. "Wait." Caroline's hand shot out, gripping Evelyn's wrist. For a moment, something almost like concern flickered in her eyes. "You don't understand. He's not like other men. 2 seasons ago, Lady Elizabeth approached him at the Devonshire ball, just to introduce herself, nothing inappropriate, and he stared at her for exactly 5 seconds before walking away without a word. She left London in disgrace. Her family barely speaks to her now." "Then why dare me to do it?" Caroline's smile returned, colder than before. "Because watching you fail will be entertaining, and because you need to learn your place." Evelyn pulled her wrist free. "Perhaps. Or perhaps London needs to learn that some of us refuse to stay in the places assigned to us." She didn't wait for a response. She crossed the ballroom floor with her head high, aware of the whispers that followed her like a wake. The crowd parted around her, not out of respect but out of morbid curiosity. They wanted to watch the spectacle. They wanted to see the nobody from Yorkshire humiliate herself. Let them watch. As she drew closer, she could see him more clearly. Duke Adrian Blackthorne was perhaps 30, though his eyes looked older. He wore his evening clothes with the casual perfection of someone who'd never had to think about appearances, but there was something about him that set him apart from every other man in the room. Power, yes, the kind that came with ancient titles and vast wealth, but also a contained intensity, like a storm held in check by sheer force of will. He was speaking with no one, simply standing, one hand holding a glass of wine he hadn't touched, watching the ballroom with an expression of profound disinterest. Or perhaps it was contempt. It was hard to tell. 20 feet away, Evelyn noticed the conversations around him had died. 15 feet, and she could feel the weight of the entire ballroom's attention on her back. 10 feet, and she saw his eyes shift, tracking her approach with the focused attention of a predator identifying movement. 5 feet, and she realized she had no idea what she was going to say. He turned to face her fully. Up close, he was even more imposing, not just tall, but built like someone who'd done more in his life than attend balls and read ledgers. His eyes were dark, almost black in the chandelier light, and they examined her with an intensity that made her want to step back. She didn't. "Your Grace," her voice came out clear, thank God. "I wonder if I might ask you something." The silence that followed was absolute. No one within 30 feet was even pretending to have other conversations. They were all watching, waiting for her destruction. "You may ask." His voice was deep, cultured, and completely devoid of warmth. "Whether I choose to answer is another matter entirely." Evelyn felt her courage wavering. This was madness. She should apologize, retreat, disappear back into the wallpaper where girls like her belonged. Caroline was right. She was about to make a spectacular fool of herself, and it would follow her for the rest of her very short London season. Then she saw Caroline watching from across the room, that knowing smirk on her perfect face, so certain of Evelyn's failure. "Would you dance with me?" The words came out in a rush, before she could stop them. "I realize it's improper for a lady to ask, and we haven't been introduced and you don't know me from anyone, but I'm asking anyway because—" She stopped herself before she could say, "because of a dare." "Because I wanted to." The silence stretched. 1 second, 2, 5, 10. Someone behind her actually gasped. Adrian Blackthorne's expression didn't change. He simply looked at her, through her, as if cataloging every inadequacy, every presumption, every reason she didn't belong in his world or his presence. "Do you have any idea," he said quietly, "who I am?" "Yes, Your Grace. You're the Duke of Blackthorne." "And do you know what that means?" "It means you're very powerful and very wealthy, and everyone in this room is afraid of you." She met his eyes directly. "It doesn't mean you can't dance." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or anger. She couldn't tell. The silence had gone from merely uncomfortable to absolutely unbearable. Evelyn could feel sweat forming under her gloves. She'd failed. Of course she'd failed. In approximately 5 seconds, he would deliver some cutting remark that would reduce her to ash, and she would have to leave London in disgrace, proving Caroline and all the others right about her. Then Adrian Blackthorne did something no one expected. He smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't even particularly friendly. But it was genuine, and it transformed his face entirely. "No," he said. "I suppose it doesn't." He set down his untouched wine glass and offered her his hand. The ballroom erupted in whispers. Evelyn stared at his outstretched hand as if it might be a trap. Perhaps it was. Perhaps he was simply prolonging her humiliation, planning to withdraw the offer at the last moment and leave her standing there like a fool. But his hand remained steady, and his eyes held something she hadn't seen before. Something that might have been respect, or at least acknowledgement of her audacity. She placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, his palm warm even through both their gloves. He led her onto the floor as the musicians, reading the room with professional acuity, struck up a waltz. The crowd parted around them like the Red Sea before Moses, everyone desperate to watch, but none wanting to be too close. "You realize," Adrian said as he placed his hand on her waist, "that you've just made yourself the subject of intense scrutiny for the remainder of the season." "I was already being scrutinized, Your Grace. At least now I've done something worth watching." His lips twitched. "What's your name?" "Evelyn Carter." "And who are you, Evelyn Carter, besides brave or foolish enough to approach the monster of London society?" They began to move. He was an excellent dancer, of course he was, guiding her through the steps with effortless precision. Evelyn had learned to dance from a local teacher in Yorkshire, and while she was competent, she'd never waltzed with someone like this. It felt less like dancing and more like flying. "I'm nobody," she said honestly. "My parents died 2 years ago. I'm here on my aunt's charity, hoping to make an advantageous match before my inheritance runs out, and I have to become a governess. Refreshingly honest. I assumed lying to you would be pointless. You look like someone who can spot a deception from across a ballroom. I can. His eyes studied her face. Why did you really ask me to dance? Does it matter? Yes. She considered lying. Considered telling him some romantic nonsense about being captivated by his presence or moved by his isolation. But she'd already committed to honesty. It was a dare. Caroline Pembroke said I wouldn't have the courage to approach you, that you'd refuse me and humiliate me in front of everyone. Most men would have been offended. Adrian Blackthorne laughed, a genuine sound that drew startled looks from nearby couples. And you accepted this dare because I'm tired of being told what I can't do, tired of knowing my place, tired of being invisible. She met his eyes, and because I thought, just once, I'd like to do something unexpected. Mission accomplished, Miss Carter. They turned in silence for several measures. Evelyn was acutely aware of every eye in the ballroom fixed upon them, of the whispers rising like steam. Across the room, Caroline looked like she'd swallowed something toxic. Aunt Marguerite had gone pale, her fan working frantically. Lady Margaret's mouth hung open in undisguised shock. They're all wondering, Adrian said quietly, what we're talking about. Let them wonder. They'll make up stories, rumors. Most of them will be terrible. Will you start them? No. His expression grew serious. But others will. Dancing with me comes with consequences, Miss Carter. I'm not well liked in certain circles. Why not? Because I refuse to play their games. Because I won't align myself with their political schemes and strategic marriages. Because I believe reform is necessary, and that makes me dangerous to those who benefit from the current system. What kind of reform? His eyes sharpened with interest. You actually want to know? I asked, didn't I? Most young ladies would rather discuss the weather or the latest fashions. Most young ladies haven't read John Stuart Mill's On Liberty or Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of Woman. He actually stumbled slightly, the first imperfection in his dancing. You've read Wollstonecraft? Twice. My father believed education was wasted on no one, regardless of gender. Something changed in his expression. The walls didn't come down exactly, but they shifted, allowing her a glimpse of the man behind the Duke's mask. I'm working to reform labor laws, he said, particularly regarding child workers in factories and mines, also pushing for expanded voting rights and educational access. It's made me unpopular with industrialists and traditionalists alike. Good, Evelyn said firmly. They should be uncomfortable. Children shouldn't be dying in coal mines to line rich men's pockets. Adrian smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuinely pleased. You're unlike anyone I've met in this city. Is that good or bad? I haven't decided yet. The waltz ended too soon. As the final notes faded, Adrian stepped back and bowed formally. Evelyn curtsied, her heart pounding. For a few minutes, she'd forgotten they were being watched. Now the weight of all those stares came crashing back. Thank you for the dance, Miss Carter. Adrian's voice was pitched for the crowd now, formal and proper. But his eyes held something else. I hope you'll save me another before the season ends. I'd be honored, Your Grace. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the center of the ballroom. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the whispers exploded like a dam breaking, and the crowd surged around her. Evelyn! Aunt Marguerite appeared at her elbow, fingers digging into her arm. What did you say to him? What did he say to you? We just danced, Aunt. No one just dances with the Duke of Blackthorne. He hasn't danced with anyone in 3 years. Do you have any idea what this means? Evelyn didn't, actually, but she was about to find out. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Suddenly, young men who'd ignored her all season were asking for her dance card. Ladies who'd cut her in receiving lines were now desperate to know her. Caroline Pembroke looked like she wanted to murder someone, preferably Evelyn. And through it all, Evelyn could feel Adrian Blackthorne's eyes on her from across the room, watching her navigate the chaos she'd created. It wasn't until the carriage ride home, with Aunt Marguerite chattering excitedly about prospects and possibilities, that Evelyn realized what she'd actually done. She hadn't just accepted a dare. She hadn't just danced with a duke. She'd stepped onto a battlefield and she had no idea what weapons she'd need to survive. The morning brought consequences. Evelyn woke to find Aunt Marguerite's drawing room filled with calling cards, more than they'd received in the entire previous 3 weeks combined. Flowers arrived by the dozen. Invitations to teas, soirees, and garden parties flooded in, and through it all, the whispers multiplied like rabbits. By noon, 3 different stories were circulating: that she'd seduced the Duke with scandalous promises, that she was secretly an heiress he'd been courting in private, that she'd somehow blackmailed him into dancing with her. "None of it's true," Evelyn protested to her aunt. "Truth doesn't matter, dear." Marguerite was reading through the invitations with barely contained glee. "What matters is that people are talking about you, and when people talk, opportunities arise." But not all the attention was welcome. That afternoon, Caroline Pembroke arrived for a call, accompanied by her mother and Lady Margaret. "How clever of you," Caroline said sweetly, settling onto the settee with practiced grace, "to make such a spectacle at your first major ball." "I didn't intend to make a spectacle." "Didn't you?" Caroline's smile was poisonous. "You approached the one man in London guaranteed to create gossip. You all but threw yourself at him in front of everyone. If that wasn't intentional, then you're even more foolish than I thought." "Caroline," her mother, Lady Pembroke, chided gently, but her eyes were calculating. "We're simply concerned about you, dear Miss Carter. The Duke of Blackthorn is complicated." "Complicated how?" "He's been expected to marry Lady Victoria Ashworth for years," Lady Margaret interjected. "Their families have been planning the alliance since they were children. It's all but settled." Evelyn's stomach tightened. "He didn't mention being engaged." "Because he's not. Yet." Caroline leaned forward. "But everyone knows it's only a matter of time. Lord Ashworth controls half the votes Blackthorn needs for his precious reforms. Victoria's dowry would fund his political campaigns for decades. It's the perfect match." "Then why hasn't he proposed?" "Because he's stubborn." Lady Pembroke's voice was patient, as if explaining something to a child. "He wants to marry for love or some other romantic nonsense. But his duty is clear. He'll come around eventually." "And when he does," Caroline added, "where will that leave you? The girl who threw herself at an engaged duke? You'll be ruined." "He's not engaged," Evelyn repeated. "Not formally. But in our world, some things are understood without being spoken. You're new here, so perhaps you don't understand how these arrangements work. But trust me when I say you're playing a game whose rules you don't know, and the stakes are higher than you realize." They left soon after, their warning delivered. Evelyn sat alone in the drawing room, her mind churning. Could they be right? Had she completely misread the situation? But then she remembered the way Adrian had looked at her, the genuine interest in his eyes when she'd talked about reform, the smile that had seemed surprised from him, as if he didn't allow himself such things very often. That hadn't been a man thinking about political alliances or strategic marriages. Had it? The doubt gnawed at her through the afternoon, but that evening it was erased completely. She was in the music room playing a complicated Mozart sonata to settle her nerves when the butler appeared in the doorway. "Miss Carter, you have a caller." "Another one?" "Tell them I'm not receiving." "I believe you'll want to receive this one, miss. It's the Duke of Blackthorn." Evelyn's fingers crashed discordantly on the keys. "What?" "He's waiting in the drawing room. Your aunt has already gone down." Evelyn stood on shaking legs, checked her appearance in the mirror, hair acceptable, dress nothing special but clean and pressed, and descended the stairs with her heart in her throat. Adrian Blackthorn stood in the center of Aunt Marguerite's drawing room, making the space seem suddenly small. He wore morning clothes, perfectly tailored, and held his hat in one hand. Aunt Marguerite was perched on the edge of her chair, looking like she might faint. "Miss Carter," he bowed. "Forgive the unexpected call. I was hoping to request the honor of driving with you in the park tomorrow afternoon." The room spun slightly. Driving in the park, one of the most public, most scrutinized activities of the London season. Everyone who was anyone paraded through Hyde Park at the fashionable hour, seen and being seen. Yes, of course, I'd be honored." "Excellent. I'll call for you at 4. He turned to Aunt Marguerite. "With your permission, of course, madam." "Yes, absolutely. Whatever you wish, Your Grace." He smiled slightly, then looked back at Evelyn. I enjoyed our conversation last night. I'd like to continue it if you're willing. I am. Good. He moved toward the door, then paused. And Miss Carter? Wear something comfortable. I thought we might stop by the Serpentine. I've heard you play piano beautifully, and there's often a string quartet there on pleasant afternoons. I thought you might enjoy hearing them. Then he was gone, leaving Evelyn and her aunt staring at each other in shock. How did he know you play piano? Marguerite demanded. Evelyn had no idea. Unless he'd asked about her. Unless he'd made inquiries. Unless their dance had mattered to him as much as it had to her. The realization sent warmth flooding through her chest, but it also sent a spike of fear. Because Caroline had been right about one thing. She was playing a game whose rules she didn't fully understand. And the stakes, her reputation, her future, possibly her heart, were higher than she'd ever imagined. Tomorrow she would drive through Hyde Park with the most powerful, most scrutinized man in London. Everyone would watch, everyone would judge, and somewhere in the crowd she knew would be Lady Victoria Ashworth and her family, watching the woman who dared to interfere with their carefully laid plans. Evelyn went to bed that night with her mind racing, unable to decide if she'd just been given an extraordinary opportunity or if she'd simply dug her grave deeper. But one thing was certain. There was no going back now. She'd stepped into the light, and whether it would illuminate her path forward or burn her to ash remained to be seen. The game had begun, and Evelyn Carter had no choice but to play. The carriage arrived at precisely 4 o'clock, black lacquered wood gleaming in the afternoon sun, the blackthorn crest emblazoned in silver on the door. Evelyn watched it pull up from her bedroom window, her stomach a knot of nerves and anticipation. She'd changed her dress 3 times before settling on a pale blue walking dress with ivory embroidery. Elegant but not ostentatious, the kind of thing that wouldn't scream trying too hard to the sharp-eyed matrons who would be watching. "You look lovely, dear." Aunt Marguerite adjusted Evelyn's bonnet for the 5th time. "Remember, be charming, but not forward. Witty, but not controversial. And for heaven's sake, don't mention politics or philosophy or any of those dreadful books your father filled your head with. He asked me about them yesterday. Men say many things they don't mean. Today is about being seen, not about being heard." Evelyn bit back her response. The butler announced the Duke's arrival, and she descended the stairs to find Adrian waiting in the foyer, looking impossibly elegant in a charcoal coat and perfectly tied cravat. His eyes found hers immediately, and something in them made her forget every piece of advice her aunt had just given. "Miss Carter, you look beautiful." "Thank you, Your Grace." He offered his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the fine wool. The footman handed her into the carriage, far more luxurious than any she'd been in before, with velvet seats and brass fittings that gleamed like gold. Adrian settled across from her, and the carriage lurched forward into the London traffic. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "Should I be?" "Probably. Half of London society will be in the park today, and they'll all be watching us." "Then I suppose I should be terrified." He smiled. "But you're not, are you?" "I'm choosing not to be. Fear doesn't change what's going to happen. It just makes the experience more unpleasant." "Where did you learn to be so practical about terror?" "Necessity." She met his eyes. "When my parents died, I had 2 choices. Collapse under the weight of it, or keep moving forward. I chose to move." His expression softened. "How old were you?" 18. Old enough to understand what I'd lost, young enough to have no idea how to manage it. And yet you managed. I survived. There's a difference." The carriage turned into Hyde Park, and Evelyn felt the shift immediately. Even through the windows, she could sense the attention, the turning heads, the ripple of recognition that spread through the crowds like wildfire. Adrian noticed it too. His posture straightened almost imperceptibly, his expression settling into the cool mask she'd seen at the ball. "This is the part where it becomes complicated," he said quietly. "I thought it was already complicated." "That was just the overture. This is the performance." The carriage slowed to join the parade of vehicles circling the park's main drive. On both sides, people strolled in their finest clothes, seeing and being seen, conducting the elaborate social dance that was London's afternoon ritual. Evelyn recognized several faces from the ball. Lady Margaret walking with her mother, Lord Pemberton escorting a young woman who looked bored to tears, Caroline Pembroke holding court, among a cluster of admirers. And there, standing beneath a massive oak tree, was a woman who could only be Lady Victoria Ashworth. She was beautiful in the way classical statues were beautiful. Perfect features, flawless posture, an expression of serene confidence that came from a lifetime of knowing exactly where she belonged. Her dress was the latest fashion from Paris, her jewels understated but clearly expensive, and she stood with two older people who had to be her parents. Lord Ashworth was a stern-faced man with iron-gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to getting his way. Lady Ashworth looked like an older, colder version of her daughter, and all three of them were staring directly at Evelyn. "That's them, isn't it?" Evelyn kept her voice low. "The Ashworths." "Yes." Adrian's tone was carefully neutral. "Are the rumors true? About you and Lady Victoria?" "Some of them. Our families have been suggesting a match since we were children. Lord Ashworth controls votes I need in Parliament. A marriage alliance would make political sense." "But?" He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something fierce and uncompromising. "But I refuse to marry for political convenience. I've told them this repeatedly. They seem to believe I'll eventually see reason." "Will you?" "No." The single word carried absolute certainty. But before Evelyn could respond, a rider appeared alongside their carriage, a young man on a magnificent bay horse, wearing the kind of smile that suggested he found everything slightly amusing. "Blackthorn! What excellent timing! I was just telling Mother you'd be here today." He tipped his hat to Evelyn. "And this must be the mysterious Miss Carter everyone is talking about." "Evelyn, may I present Lord Henry Ashworth, Victoria's younger brother. Henry, Miss Evelyn Carter." "Charmed." Henry's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Tell me, Miss Carter, is it true you approached my sisters intended at the ball and demanded a dance?" "Henry," Adrian's voice carried a warning. "What? I'm simply asking what everyone else is wondering. Besides, I think it's marvelous. London's been dreadfully dull lately. We needed someone to shake things up." He leaned closer to Evelyn, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Between you and me, I never liked the idea of Adrian marrying Victoria anyway. They'd bore each other to death within a month." "Your sister might not appreciate that assessment," Evelyn said. "My sister doesn't appreciate much of anything except her own reflection. But she's standing over there looking like she's swallowed a lemon, so I should probably go smooth things over before she does something dramatic." He tipped his hat again. "Lovely to meet you, Miss Carter. Do try not to cause too much scandal, though if you must, please make it entertaining." He rode off, leaving Evelyn slightly dazed. "He's not what I expected," she said. "Henry's the family rebel. Drives his father to distraction by refusing to take anything seriously." "I liked him." "Most people do. He's also sharper than he pretends to be, so don't underestimate him." The carriage continued its circuit, and with each passing minute, Evelyn felt the weight of scrutiny growing heavier. Women whispered behind fans. Men stared openly. Somewhere behind them, she could hear Caroline's distinctive laugh, probably spreading some new rumor. The attention was suffocating, and they hadn't even stopped yet. "You're doing well," Adrian said quietly. "I feel like an exotic animal in a menagerie." "That's not far from the truth. Welcome to high society." They reached the Serpentine, where a string quartet was indeed playing beneath a white pavilion. Adrian helped her from the carriage, and they walked toward the music through a gauntlet of stares and whispers. Evelyn kept her head high, her hand resting lightly on Adrian's arm, trying to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel. The music was beautiful, a complex piece by Haydn that the quartet executed with professional precision. Adrian found them a spot slightly removed from the main crowd, and for a few minutes, Evelyn could almost forget they were being watched. "Do you play anything besides piano?" Adrian asked. "A little violin, though not well. My father believed music was essential to a complete education." "He sounds like he was an interesting man." "He was. He spent his entire life being told he was too idealistic, too impractical, too focused on ideas instead of wealth. When he died, people called it inevitable, as if dreaming of a better world was a fatal flaw." "Perhaps it is in its own way. Do you believe that?" Adrian was quiet for a moment, watching the musicians. "I think idealism is dangerous when it ignores reality. But I also think pragmatism without ideals is empty. We need both." "Which are you?" "I'd like to think I'm both.
but others would probably say I'm a stubborn fool who refuses to accept how the world actually works. Others like Lord Ashworth? Especially like Lord Ashworth.
He glanced toward where Victoria and her family were now approaching, moving through the crowd with the inevitability of a storm system. He believes power and tradition are the only things that matter, that reform is dangerous because it threatens the natural order. And what do you believe? That the natural order is a myth created by those who benefit from it. That power should serve people, not the other way around. And that tradition without purpose is just another word for stagnation. Your Grace! Lord Ashworth's voice cut through the music like a blade. He'd reached them, Victoria on his arm, Lady Ashworth trailing behind with an expression that could freeze water. What a pleasant surprise to see you here. Lord Ashworth, Lady Ashworth, Victoria. Adrian's tone was perfectly polite and completely cold. May I present Miss Evelyn Carter? The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Lady Ashworth's eyes raked over Evelyn from head to toe, cataloging every imperfection, every sign that she didn't belong. Miss Carter, the words were ice. How interesting that we keep hearing your name lately. Lady Ashworth, Evelyn curtsied, fighting to keep her voice steady. Victoria stepped forward, and up close she was even more beautiful, and even more terrifying. Her smile was perfect, her eyes calculating, and when she spoke, her voice carried the subtle edge of someone who knew exactly how to draw blood without leaving visible wounds. What a charming dress, Miss Carter. So quaint. Is that the fashion in Yorkshire? I wouldn't know, Lady Victoria. I've been focused more on substance than fashion. The smile tightened fractionally. How admirable. Though I've always found that people who claim not to care about appearances are usually the ones who can't afford to compete. Victoria. Adrian's voice carried a warning. What? I'm simply being honest. Miss Carter clearly values honesty. Isn't that right? She turned those beautiful cold eyes on Evelyn. After all, it takes remarkable honesty to approach a gentleman at a ball without introduction or invitation. Some might call it refreshing. Others might use different words, such as desperate, presumptuous, calculating. Evelyn felt her face flush, but before she could respond, Adrian moved between them. That's enough, Victoria. Is it? I'm simply protecting your interests, Adrian. People are talking. They're saying this girl, she gestured at Evelyn as if she were an unfortunate stain, has set her cap at you, that she's using social naivety as a strategy to gain your attention and sympathy. And you believe this? I believe she's smarter than she pretends to be. I believe she saw an opportunity and took it. And I believe, Victoria's voice dropped to something more dangerous, that she has no idea what she's interfering with. Lord Ashworth cleared his throat. Perhaps this conversation would be better suited to a more private venue. I agree. Adrian's jaw was tight. Victoria, I'll call on you tomorrow. We need to discuss several things. I look forward to it. Victoria's smile returned triumphant. She turned to Evelyn one more time. Enjoy your afternoon, Miss Carter. London can be such a lovely city for visitors, though I imagine you'll be returning to Yorkshire soon. They swept away, leaving Evelyn shaking with a mixture of anger and humiliation. Around them, dozens of people were pretending not to have witnessed the exchange, while clearly having heard every word. I'm sorry, Adrian said quietly. That was inexcusable. She's right, though, isn't she? I'm interfering with something. You're not interfering with anything. There is no understanding between Victoria and myself, no matter what her family believes. But there could be. There should be, politically speaking. Her father has power you need. Her dowry could fund your reforms. And I'm just... She stopped herself. Just what? Just a girl from Yorkshire with no connections, no dowry worth mentioning, and apparently a talent for making enemies of powerful people. Adrian took her arm and guided her away from the pavilion, away from the crowds, toward a quieter path lined with trees. When they were sufficiently alone, he stopped and turned to face her. Listen to me carefully. I don't care about political marriages or strategic alliances. I don't care what Victoria or her father think I should do. And I certainly don't care what the rest of London society believes is appropriate. Then what do you care about? The truth. Real conversation. Someone who challenges me instead of simply agreeing with everything I say because of my title. His eyes held hers. Someone who reads Wollstonecraft and approaches dukes at balls because she refuses to be afraid of them. I
was terrified of you. But you approached me anyway. That's courage, Evelyn.
Real courage, not the performative kind that fills ballrooms and drawing rooms. She wanted to believe him, but Victoria's words echoed in her mind, desperate, presumptuous, calculating. What if she was right? What if Evelyn had fooled herself into thinking this could be something real when it was actually just social climbing disguised as bravery?
Take me home, please, she whispered. Evelyn, please, Your Grace, I need to think.
The ride back was silent. Adrian watched her with concern, but he didn't push, and she was grateful for that. When they reached her aunt's house, he helped her down from the carriage and held her hand a moment longer than necessary. "Don't let them win," he said quietly. "Don't let them make you believe you don't belong here. Maybe I don't. Maybe none of us do. Maybe this whole system is broken and corrupt and desperately in need of people who refuse to play by its rules." He smiled slightly. "Like you." Then he was gone, leaving Evelyn standing on the steps of her aunt's house, her mind a chaos of confusion and doubt. Aunt Marguerite was waiting inside, practically vibrating with anxiety. "What happened? Lady Pemberton sent a note saying there was a scene at the Serpentine, that Victoria Ashworth publicly humiliated you. Is it true?" "It's complicated." "Complicated? Evelyn, you've been in London less than a month, and you've managed to make an enemy of one of the most powerful families in England. Do you understand what this means?" "Yes, Aunt. I understand perfectly." The next 3 days proved just how perfectly she understood. The invitations stopped arriving. The calling cards dried up. Women who'd been desperate to know her after the ball now turned their backs when she entered a room. At Lady Thornbury's tea, Caroline engineered a conversation loud enough for half the room to hear about provincial girls who overreach and the dangers of social climbing. But worse than the social cuts were the rumors. They spread like poison through London's drawing rooms, that Evelyn had fabricated a connection with Adrian to attract other suitors, that she'd been seen alone with him in compromising situations, that her parents had died in scandal and disgrace rather than illness, that she was secretly an actress or worse. None of it was true. All of it was believed. Aunt Marguerite grew increasingly desperate. "You need to apologize to Lady Victoria. Send her flowers, a note, anything to smooth this over." "I won't apologize for existing." "Then you'll be ruined. Is that what you want?" What Evelyn wanted was to hide in her room and pretend none of this was happening. What she wanted was to go back to Yorkshire, where life was simple and no one cared about political marriages or social hierarchies. What she wanted was to have never accepted that Dare, never approached Adrian Blackthorne, never stepped into this world of elegant cruelty. But on the 4th day, a letter arrived. The handwriting was Adrian's, bold, confident strokes in black ink. Evelyn opened it with trembling fingers. "Miss Carter, I've been informed that your social situation has become difficult due to your association with me. I regret this deeply, as you've done nothing to deserve such treatment. However, I have a proposition. In 2 days, there will be a musicale at Lady Hartwell's townhouse. It's one of the season's most important events, and attendance is considered essential for anyone with serious social aspirations. I've been asked to attend, and I'm permitted to bring a guest. I would like that guest to be you. I realize this might make your situation more complicated rather than less, but I believe it's time to make a public statement about the nature of our acquaintance and my regard for you. If you accept, it will send a clear message to everyone who's been spreading rumors. The choice is yours. If you prefer to step back and let this scandal die quietly, I'll understand. But if you're willing to fight, if you're willing to show Victoria and her allies that you refuse to be intimidated, then I'm asking you to stand with me. Yours, Adrian Blackthorne." Evelyn read the letter 3 times. Aunt Marguerite, reading over her shoulder, gasped. "You can't accept. It would be the final nail in your social coffin. Or it could be salvation. Don't be naive. The Ashworths will see this as a declaration of war. They'll destroy you." "They're already trying to destroy me." "Then don't give them more ammunition." But Evelyn was remembering something her father had told her once during one of their philosophical discussions. Sometimes the only way to win is to refuse to play by their rules. Make them play by yours instead. She'd spent 4 days playing by their rules, apologizing implicitly by staying quiet, accepting the social cuts,
trying to make herself smaller and less threatening. And where had it gotten her? Exactly nowhere. She was already ruined in their eyes. The only question was whether she'd be ruined while cowering or while standing tall. She picked up her pen. Your Grace, I accept. And I'll wear red. Evelyn Carter. The response was characteristically brief. Perfect. I'll call for you at 7. Aunt Marguerite spent the next 2 days trying to talk her out of it, but Evelyn was done listening. She went to the modiste and commissioned a dress in deep crimson silk, bold, unapologetic, impossible to ignore. When the modiste hesitated, suggesting perhaps a nice pale pink would be more appropriate, Evelyn simply said, red, like blood, like roses, like revolution. The dress was ready the day before the musicale, and when Evelyn tried it on, even Aunt Marguerite fell silent. It wasn't scandalous, the neckline was appropriate, the sleeves proper, but it was powerful in a way that had nothing to do with exposure. It was the color of defiance, and everyone who saw it would know exactly what it meant. The evening of the musicale, Evelyn dressed with the care of a soldier preparing for battle. Hair pinned perfectly, gloves spotless, and that red dress, vibrant as a flag of war. Adrian arrived precisely at 7. When he saw her, his eyes widened slightly, then he smiled, a genuine, delighted smile that transformed his usually stern face. You look magnificent. I look dangerous. Even better. The ride to Lady Hartwell's was quiet. Evelyn's hands were shaking, and she clasped them tightly in her lap to hide it. Adrian noticed anyway. You don't have to do this, he said gently. We can turn around right now. I'll make your excuses. No, I'm tired of running, tired of apologizing for existing. If they want a scandal, I'll give them one worth talking about. That's the spirit. Lady Hartwell's townhouse blazed with light, carriages lined up for blocks to discharge their elegant cargo. As Evelyn stepped down, she felt every eye turn toward her. The red dress did exactly what she'd intended. It made her impossible to ignore. Adrian offered his arm, and together they climbed the steps. The musicale was held in a grand salon with perfect acoustics and room for perhaps 200 guests. When Evelyn and Adrian entered, the room didn't quite fall silent, but conversation definitely stuttered. Heads turned, fans fluttered, whispers erupted like brushfire. And there, in the front row of seats, sat Victoria Ashworth, flanked by her parents. Her expression when she saw Evelyn's dress was worth every moment of anxiety. Shall we? Adrian murmured, guiding Evelyn toward the seats Lady Hartwell had reserved for them, front row, directly beside the Ashworths. This was going to be a very long evening. They settled into their seats just as the first performer, a soprano from Italy, took the small stage. Victoria leaned across her mother to whisper loud enough for them to hear. How bold, Miss Carter. Red is such a statement color. I thought it appropriate for the occasion. And what occasion would that be? The one where I stopped pretending to be invisible. Victoria's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, the music began. The soprano's voice filled the salon, pure and powerful, and for a moment, Evelyn could forget everything else and simply listen. But the piece didn't last. During the interval between performances, Lord Ashworth rose and made his way directly to Adrian. A word, Blackthorn. In private. Not anything you have to say to me can be said here. I don't think you want that. Try me. The conversation around them was dying as people realized something significant was happening. Lord Ashworth's face reddened, but he kept his voice low. You're making a mistake. This girl is manipulating you, using your reputation for her own advancement. That's not your concern. It is when it affects my daughter, when it affects our family's arrangement. There is no arrangement. I've told you this repeatedly. You say that now, but when Parliament reconvenes and you need votes for your precious reforms, who do you think will support you? Not the men who've watched you publicly insult my family. Adrian's voice was dangerously quiet. Are you threatening me? I'm reminding you of reality. Politics requires compromise, Blackthorn. You can't change the world on idealism alone. I can try. And fail. And in 5 years, when your reforms are dead and your political capital is spent, you'll realize you threw it all away for a girl in a red dress who won't even remember your name. Evelyn felt the words like a physical blow, because part of her, the terrified, doubting part, wondered if he was right. What if she was inadvertently destroying everything Adrian was trying to accomplish? What if her presence was actually hurting the very reforms she believed in? But then Adrian did something unexpected. He stood, faced Lord Ashworth directly, and spoke loud enough for half the room to hear. "Let me be absolutely clear. There will be no marriage between your daughter and myself. There will be no political alliance between our families. And if you choose to withdraw your support for my reforms because of it, then I'll find other allies, ones who care more about justice than maintaining their grip on power." The salon had gone completely silent. Everyone was watching now, the performance forgotten. Lord Ashworth's face had gone from red to purple. "You'll regret this." "Perhaps, but I'll regret it on my own terms, not yours." The older man turned and stalked toward the door, his wife and daughter hurrying after him. Victoria paused long enough to look back at Evelyn, and in her eyes was pure hatred. "You've won nothing," she said quietly. "This isn't over." Then they were gone, and the salon erupted in whispers. Adrian sat down, seemingly unconcerned with the chaos he'd just created. He turned to Evelyn, and in his eyes was something fierce and triumphant. "Well," he said, "that's done." Evelyn couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. He just sacrificed his political alliance, his reform efforts, possibly his entire future, for her, for someone he barely knew. It was the most romantic and most terrifying thing anyone had ever done. "Why?" she finally whispered. "Because some things matter more than politics, and you, Evelyn Carter, are one of them." The music resumed, but Evelyn heard nothing. All she could think was that she'd just become the center of the biggest scandal London had seen in years. And unlike the rumors and whispers of the past week, this one was entirely, spectacularly real. She'd wanted to stop being invisible. She'd succeeded beyond her wildest nightmares, and the war had only just begun. The carriage ride back to Aunt Marguerite's house was silent, but it was the kind of silence that screamed louder than words. Evelyn sat rigid against the velvet seat, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white beneath her gloves. Adrian watched her with concern, but she couldn't meet his eyes, couldn't face what he'd just sacrificed for her. When they arrived, he helped her down and walked her to the door. "Evelyn, don't," her voice cracked. "Don't tell me it will be fine, because we both know it won't be." "I don't regret what I said." "You will. When your reforms fail. When the children you're trying to save keep dying in factories because you don't have the votes to stop it. When you realize you threw away everything that mattered for—" She stopped herself. "For what? Say it." "For someone you barely know. Someone who isn't worth it." His hand caught her chin, gentle but firm, forcing her to look at him. "You're worth more than 1,000 political alliances. And those reforms? I'll find another way. I always do. That's not how the world works. Then maybe it's time the world learned to work differently." He left her standing there, watching his carriage disappear into the London night. Evelyn climbed the steps on shaking legs, knowing that when she opened that door, everything would change. She was right. Aunt Marguerite was waiting in the drawing room, her face pale, a newspaper clutched in her trembling hands. Not tomorrow's edition, that would take hours to print. But someone had clearly sent word ahead, because her aunt's expression held the kind of horror usually reserved for deaths and disasters. "What have you done?" Marguerite's voice was barely a whisper. "What have you done?" "I went to a musicale." "You destroyed us. Lord Pemberton has already sent word withdrawing his invitation to the garden party. Lady Thornbury's secretary delivered a note saying we're no longer welcome at her salon. And I just received a message from Lady Ashworth herself." Her voice broke. "She's telling everyone you're a conniving social climber who seduced the Duke of Blackthorn away from his proper engagement." "There was no engagement." "It doesn't matter. No one cares about the truth when the lie is so much more entertaining." Marguerite threw the newspaper at Evelyn's feet. "Tomorrow morning, every drawing room in London will be discussing how you ruined everything. How a nobody from Yorkshire destroyed one of the most important political alliances in a generation. How you're responsible for killing reform efforts that could have saved thousands of lives." The words hit like physical blows. Evelyn bent to pick up the newspaper, but her aunt's voice stopped her. "Don't bother. I can tell you what it says. That you're calculating, manipulative. That you played on the Duke's sympathy and his weakness for radical ideas.
That you're everything wrong with the modern world. Common people forgetting their place, disrupting the natural order. The natural order is a lie created by people who benefit from it. Evelyn was repeating Adrian's words, but they felt hollow now. Perhaps it is. But it's also reality, and you can't fight reality, Evelyn. You can only survive it or be crushed by it. Marguerite's face hardened. Pack your things. You're going back to Yorkshire tomorrow. No. This isn't a discussion. I took you in out of charity, but I won't let you drag my reputation down with yours. If you leave now, quietly, perhaps I can salvage something from this disaster. I won't run. Then you're a fool. The Ashworths are one of the most powerful families in England. Lord Ashworth controls newspapers, banks, half the votes in Parliament. If he decides to destroy you completely, and he will, there's nowhere you can hide. Not in London, not in Yorkshire, not anywhere. Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to find some brave response that would make this all seem manageable, but she could see the truth in her aunt's eyes. This wasn't melodrama. This was real danger, and she'd walked into it with her eyes wide open. I need to think. Think quickly, because by tomorrow morning your name will be poison in every respectable house in London. Evelyn fled to her room, her crimson dress suddenly feeling like a target painted on her back. She tore it off and stood shaking in her chemise, staring at herself in the mirror. Who was she? A brave woman standing up for what she believed in, or a reckless fool who'd destroyed a good man's chance to change the world because she was too proud to know her place? She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat by the window watching the sky lighten from black to gray to the pale gold of dawn and tried to figure out how to survive what was coming. The newspapers arrived with breakfast. Aunt Marguerite had been wrong about one thing. It wasn't just one drawing room discussing Evelyn Carter. It was all of them. The Morning Chronicle was the worst. Social climber and Trapp's reformed duke screamed the headline, followed by a detailed account of how Evelyn had cunningly manipulated Adrian Blackthorne, preying on his well-known sympathy for the lower classes to advance her own position. The article included quotes from unnamed sources describing her as desperate, calculating, and dangerous to the social fabric. The Times was more subtle but equally damning, focusing on how the broken alliance between Blackthorne and Ashworth would doom important reform legislation and condemn thousands of workers to continued suffering. Even the progressive papers, the ones that usually supported Adrian's causes, turned on her. The Westminster Review published an editorial suggesting that Evelyn represented everything wrong with modern society. Individuals placing personal desire above communal good, disrupting carefully negotiated compromises in service of selfish romantic fantasies. They're making me responsible for saving those children, Evelyn whispered, reading the words over and over. They're saying that if reform fails, if children keep dying in factories, it's my fault. Aunt Marguerite, reading over her shoulder, said nothing. What could she say? The accusations were absurd, but they were also working. By noon, 3 more invitations had been withdrawn. By afternoon, former friends were crossing the street to avoid her aunt. By evening, even the servants were whispering. Adrian sent a note, delivered by his personal footman. Don't believe what they're writing. I'm working on a solution. Trust me. But trust required hope, and Evelyn's hope was drowning in newsprint and social condemnation. The next blow came from an unexpected direction. Caroline Pembroke arrived for a call, accompanied by her mother and Lady Margaret. They were shown into the drawing room where Evelyn and her aunt sat in increasingly desperate isolation. We heard about your difficulties, Lady Pembroke said, her voice dripping false sympathy. How terrible for you. What do you want, Caroline? Evelyn was too exhausted for politeness. To offer you a way out. Caroline settled onto the settee, smoothing her skirts with practiced precision. The situation is quite simple. You've become associated with scandal through your connection to the Duke of Blackthorne. But if you were to publicly acknowledge that the connection was a mistake, that you were naive and overeager, that you misunderstood the Duke's kindness for something more, then the scandal could be contained. You want me to lie. I want you to be practical. Write a letter to the papers, apologize for your presumption, admit that you've been foolish, and then quietly leave London. Caroline's smile was poisonous. Do this, and the Ashworths might be persuaded to let the matter drop. Refuse, and they'll make sure you're destroyed so completely that no respectable family in England will even speak your name. And if I refuse, Lady Pembroke leaned forward. Then the stories will get worse, much worse. There are rumors already circulating that you were seen alone with the Duke in compromising positions, that your parents' deaths weren't from illness but from scandal, that you're not actually a gentleman's daughter at all, but an actress who fabricated her background to infiltrate society. None of that is true. Does it matter? Truth is whatever people believe, Miss Carter, and right now they're quite willing to believe the worst of you. Evelyn's hands were shaking. What about Adrian, the Duke? What about him? Caroline examined her nails. He'll be fine. Men always are. After an appropriate period of being misled by a clever social climber, he'll apologize to the Ashworths, marry Victoria, and everyone will forget this unpleasantness ever happened. The reforms might be delayed a year or two, but ultimately everything will return to how it should be. How it should be, Evelyn repeated numbly, with children dying in factories while rich people drink champagne. The world has always been thus. Some people are meant to lead, others to follow. You tried to reach above your station, and now you're learning why that's dangerous. Caroline stood, her expression almost pitying. You have until tomorrow evening to decide. Write the letter or face the consequences. They left, and Evelyn sat in the drawing room feeling like she couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in. Every direction led to disaster. If she stayed and fought, she'd be destroyed, and might destroy Adrian's chance to help those children. If she ran, she'd be admitting defeat, proving everyone right about her. And either way, the Ashworths won. That evening, Adrian managed to slip past the growing crowd of curious onlookers outside Aunt Marguerite's house. He looked exhausted, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. I'm fixing this, he said without preamble. I've been meeting with other members of Parliament, building new alliances. It won't work. Evelyn's voice was flat. Not in time. The Ashworths control too much. Then we'll find another way. There is no other way, Adrian, don't you see? They've made me the villain in everyone's story, the selfish girl who put her own desires above the lives of children. And the worst part is, they might be right. You don't believe that. Don't I? You sacrificed your political alliance for me. Without it, your reforms will fail. Children will keep dying. And for what? For a few dances? For someone you barely know? Adrian grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me. Those children were dying before I met you. They'll keep dying until we change the system that allows it. But that change can't be built on lies and forced marriages and political deals that treat people like chess pieces. If I have to compromise everything I believe in just to save my reforms, then the reforms themselves become meaningless. That's idealistic nonsense. Maybe. But it's the only kind of sense I know how to make. His voice softened. I'm not giving up on you, Evelyn, and I'm not letting them win. They've already won. They're just letting us pretend we still have choices. A knock on the door interrupted them. The butler entered, looking uncomfortable. Miss Carter, there's a gentleman here to see you, Lord Henry Ashworth. Adrian's jaw tightened. What does he want? Henry entered before anyone could answer, his usual easy smile replaced by grim determination. I need to speak with Miss Carter, alone. Anything you have to say can be said in front of me, Adrian said. Actually, it can't, because what I'm about to tell her could get me disowned if my family finds out. Henry turned to Evelyn. Please. 5 minutes. Adrian looked like he wanted to argue, but Evelyn nodded. He left reluctantly, closing the door behind him. Henry waited until the footsteps faded before speaking. My father is planning something. Something worse than social ruin. Evelyn's stomach dropped. What do you mean? He's been meeting with newspaper editors, paying them to run stories about you. But that's just the beginning. He's also been meeting with some unsavory individuals, the kind who specialize in creating evidence where none exists. Evidence of what? Whatever he needs. Forged letters suggesting an inappropriate relationship with Adrian. Witnesses who'll swear they saw you in compromising positions. Maybe even documents suggesting your parents were involved in criminal activity. Henry's voice was urgent. He's building a case that will make you radioactive. Not just socially ruined, but legally questionable. The kind of scandal that makes you unemployable, unmarriageable, completely isolated. Why are you telling me this? Because it's wrong. Because Victoria is my sister, but that doesn't mean I agree with how my father operates. And because, he hesitated, Because I think you actually make Adrian happy. I've known him for years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Evelyn felt tears burning behind her eyes. "It doesn't matter. I can't fight your father. No one can." "Not alone. But what if you didn't have to be alone?" Henry pulled a folded paper from his coat.
"This is a list of people who are tired of my father's manipulations. Members of parliament who've been pressured into supporting his agenda against their own beliefs. Business owners who've been blackmailed into compliance. Even some journalists who are sick of being told what to write. What am I supposed to do with this? Build your own alliance. Expose what my father has been doing.
Show London that he's not some noble protector of tradition. He's a tyrant who uses fear and manipulation to maintain power."
That's suicide. He'll destroy me even faster. He's already destroying you. At least this way you go down fighting."
Henry's eyes were intense. "And maybe, you actually win. Because there are more people angry with my father than you realize. They're just too scared to act first." Evelyn stared at the list, her mind racing. It was insane, reckless, the kind of decision that would either save her or finish her destruction completely. "If I do this, your family will never forgive you." "I know." Henry smiled slightly. "But I'm tired of being the family disappointment who doesn't stand for anything. Might as well be the family disappointment who stands for something worth the cost." After he left, Evelyn sat alone with the list, reading the names. There were perhaps 30 people on it, not enough to guarantee victory, but enough to create real opposition, enough to make Lord Ashworth's victory less certain. Adrian returned, looking between her and the list. "What did he give you?" "Either salvation or my own execution warrant. I'm not sure which." She explained Henry's plan. As she spoke, she watched Adrian's expression shift from concern to understanding to something that might have been pride. "You're going to do it," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I think I have to, because you were right. If I run now, I'm letting them win. I'm proving that power and fear are all that matter, and I can't accept that. It's dangerous. Everything worth doing is dangerous." Adrian pulled her into his arms, and for a moment, Evelyn let herself feel safe. Let herself believe this could actually work. But she knew the truth. She was about to declare war on one of the most powerful men in England, and the odds of survival were slim at best. The next morning, instead of writing the apologetic letter Caroline had demanded, Evelyn drafted something else entirely. With Adrian's help and Henry's list, she crafted a statement detailing Lord Ashworth's pattern of manipulation, his use of social pressure to force political compliance, his willingness to destroy anyone who challenged his authority. They sent copies to every name on Henry's list, along with a personal note. "I'm fighting back. Stand with me." Then they waited. The responses came slowly at first. A member of parliament who'd been blackmailed into opposing labor reforms. A journalist tired of being told what stories to suppress. A businessman whose company had been nearly destroyed when he refused to support Ashworth's candidates. One by one, they agreed. Not publicly. Not yet. But privately, they pledged to expose what they knew about Lord Ashworth's methods. To speak truth to power, consequences be damned. For 2 days, it felt like they might actually have a chance. Then everything fell apart. Evelyn woke on the third morning to shouting outside her window. She rushed to look out and found a crowd gathering, not the curious onlookers of previous days, but an angry mob waving newspapers and shouting accusations. "Whore!" someone screamed. "Destroying England's future for your own ambition." Aunt Marguerite burst into her room, her face ashen. "You need to see this." The morning papers were worse than anything Evelyn could have imagined. The Times had published what they claimed was a letter from Evelyn to Adrian, detailed, intimate, explicitly describing a physical relationship that had never happened. The handwriting was expertly forged, the paper and ink exactly matching her personal stationery. Worse, there were witness statements. A maid who claimed to have seen them alone together in compromising positions. A footman who swore he'd delivered love letters between them for weeks. All lies, but presented with such detail and consistency that they seemed impossible to refute. And the final blow, documents suggesting that Evelyn's parents had been involved in financial fraud, that her modest inheritance was actually stolen money, that her entire background was a fabrication. "Ashworth," Evelyn whispered, just like Henry warned. "He's fabricating evidence." But knowing it was fabricated didn't stop the damage. By noon, the people on Henry's list were withdrawing their support one by one, terrified of being associated with her. By afternoon, Adrian's own political allies were distancing themselves, claiming they'd been deceived about her character. And by evening, when Adrian arrived looking devastated, Evelyn knew it was over. "They're calling for an investigation," he said quietly, "into the financial fraud allegations. If they proceed, you could face criminal charges. For crimes I didn't commit. I know, but Ashworth has manufactured enough evidence that a trial is inevitable. And in the current climate, with everyone believing the worst of you," he stopped, unable to finish. "I'd be convicted." "Possibly." The word hung between them like a guillotine blade. Evelyn felt something break inside her. Not her courage, but her hope. She'd fought. She'd been brave. She'd refused to bow to pressure or accept defeat, and she'd lost anyway. "There's one option left," Adrian said, his voice rough with emotion. "One way to stop this immediately and protect you from prosecution." "What?" "Marry me. Tonight. Before they can file charges. Once you're the Duchess of Blackthorn, they can't touch you without touching me. And even Ashworth won't risk a direct confrontation with the Duke of my standing." Evelyn stared at him. It was the proposal every girl in London dreamed of. Instant wealth, status, protection. Everything she'd supposedly been scheming for all along. And she couldn't accept it. "No," she whispered. "Evelyn, don't you see? If I marry you now, it proves everyone right. That I was manipulating you from the start. That everything they've said about me is true. It makes you look like a fool who was seduced by a calculating social climber, and it destroys any credibility you have left for your reforms. I don't care about my credibility. I care about keeping you safe. And I care about making sure your work matters. About making sure those children have a chance at a better future. If I marry you now, we both lose everything, including each other." Tears were streaming down her face now. "Because eventually, you'd resent me. You'd look at me and see the woman who cost you everything you'd worked for. And I couldn't bear that. You're wrong. I'd never—" "You would. Maybe not today. Maybe not next year. But eventually, when another child dies in a factory that should have been reformed, you'd wonder if it might have been different, if you'd chosen differently." Adrian grabbed her hands, his own shaking. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you too much to let you destroy yourself saving me." The words hung into the air between them. The first time either had spoken of love, and perhaps the last. Adrian's face crumpled with anguish. "There has to be another way." "There isn't, and we both know it." She pulled her hands free gently, stepped back, put physical distance between them to match the impossible chasm that circumstances had created. "Tomorrow morning, I'm leaving London. I'll go somewhere far enough away that the scandal can't follow. Maybe America, maybe the continent. Somewhere I can start over with a new name. Evelyn, and you're going to let me go. You're going to apologize to the Ashworths, tell them you were deceived by me, that you see now that marriage to Victoria is the sensible choice. You're going to rebuild your political alliances and fight for those reforms with every weapon you have." "I can't." "You must. Because if you don't, then everything we've endured was meaningless. The children I've been accused of dooming, they actually will be doomed if you don't find a way to help them, and I won't be responsible for that." Adrian was crying now, silent tears tracking down his face. "This is what they wanted. They win. No, they don't win. Because we're choosing this. We're making the impossible decision to put the greater good above our own happiness. That's not defeat. That's honor." Her voice broke. "It's the only honor we have left." She kissed him then, one final time, tasted salt from both their tears, felt his arms come around her like he could hold her there forever through sheer force of will. But even love couldn't change reality. Even courage couldn't defeat a system built on power and manipulation. When they finally pulled apart, Evelyn forced herself to say the words that would end everything. "Goodbye, Adrian." She turned and walked away, up the stairs to her room, and didn't let herself look back. Couldn't let herself see his face, or she'd break completely. Behind her, she heard the drawing room door close, heard the carriage pull away, heard the sound of her own world ending. Aunt Marguerite found her hours later, still sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. "I've made arrangements," her aunt said quietly. "A ship leaves for New York in 3 days. I have a friend there who can help you establish yourself. A new name, a new history. Thank you.
For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice, the brave choice. Then why does it feel like I'm dying?
Marguerite had no answer to that. The next 2 days passed in a blur. Evelyn packed her few belongings, said goodbye to the servants, tried to memorize every detail of London before she left it forever. She wrote letters she would never send, to Adrian, explaining everything she hadn't been able to say, to the children she'd never meet, the ones whose lives depended on reforms she'd inadvertently endangered. On the final evening, there was a knock at her door. Henry Ashworth stood in the hallway, his face grim. "I tried," he said without preamble. "I confronted my father about the forged evidence, told him it was dishonorable and cruel." "What did he say?" "That honor is a luxury only winners can afford, that you are a threat to the natural order and threats must be eliminated." Henry's hands were clenched into fists. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter. I thought we could beat him. I was wrong." "You tried. That's more than most people would have done." "It wasn't enough." He pulled an envelope from his coat. "But I can give you this. It's information about my father's financial dealings, some questionable investments, possibly illegal activity. If you ever decide to come back and fight, this could help." Evelyn took the envelope, though she knew she'd never use it.
"Why are you giving me this?" "Because someone needs to have ammunition against him. Someone who isn't afraid to use it." His smile was sad. "I thought that could be you, but I understand if you're done fighting." After he left, Evelyn sat holding the envelope, feeling its weight. Inside was power, the kind that could actually hurt Lord Ashworth, maybe even bring him down. But using it would mean staying, fighting, risking everything she'd just sacrificed to protect. She should burn it. Get on that ship. Start over somewhere the Ashworth's reach didn't extend. She should choose survival over vengeance. But as she sat there in the darkness, holding information that could change everything, Evelyn Carter realized something fundamental had shifted inside her. She was tired of running, tired of being noble, tired of sacrificing her own future to protect people who'd stood by and watched her be destroyed. Maybe Adrian could find another way to fight for his reforms. Maybe she could trust him to save those children without her help. But Lord Ashworth? He needed to pay for what he'd done. Not just to her, but to everyone he'd ever crushed beneath his ambition. Every person he'd blackmailed into compliance. Every life he'd ruined to maintain his grip on power. And Evelyn Carter, the girl from Yorkshire who'd walked into a ballroom and asked a duke to dance, was the only one with the evidence to make him fall. The ship to New York left in the morning. Her passage was booked, her new identity prepared. But sitting there in the darkness, holding Lord Ashworth's secrets, Evelyn made a different choice. She wasn't getting on that ship. She was going to war. The envelope sat on Evelyn's desk like a loaded weapon. She didn't open it immediately, didn't need to. Henry's grim expression had told her everything she needed to know about what it contained. Information dangerous enough to bring down Lord Ashworth. Evidence that could change everything. But evidence alone wasn't enough. She'd learned that much from watching the man destroy her reputation with carefully orchestrated lies. Facts meant nothing if no one was willing to listen to them. Power meant nothing if you didn't know how to wield it. She needed a strategy, a plan. And most importantly, she needed allies who wouldn't abandon her at the first sign of pressure. The clock struck midnight. In 9 hours, her ship would leave for New York. Aunt Marguerite thought she was packed and ready, prepared to disappear into a new life with a new name. Instead, Evelyn lit a candle, opened the envelope, and began to read. What she found made her hands shake. Lord Ashworth hadn't just been manipulating politics and society. He'd been systematically defrauding investors for years. The documents detailed a complex scheme. He'd been taking money meant for charitable foundations, orphanages, hospitals, worker relief funds, and funneling it into his own accounts. The charities existed on paper, received public donations and government subsidies, but the money never reached those who needed it. Instead, it disappeared into shell companies Ashworth controlled. Hundreds of thousands of pounds, maybe more. All stolen from the vulnerable people Ashworth claimed to be helping. The children dying in factories? Some of them could have been saved if the worker relief funds had actually existed. The orphans left destitute? Their care had been paid for. Ashworth had simply pocketed the money and let them starve. Evelyn felt rage building in her chest,
hot and clarifying. This wasn't about political differences or social hierarchies anymore. This was about a man who'd built his power on the corpses of children while presenting himself as a pillar of society. And everyone believed him. Everyone trusted him. Not anymore. She worked through the night, cross-referencing the documents Henry had provided with public records she'd studied during her father's lessons in finance and law. The evidence was damning, but it was also complex, the kind of thing that would be easy to dismiss as forgery or misunderstanding if presented wrong. She needed it simple, clear, impossible to deny. By dawn, she had a plan. It was audacious, possibly suicidal, and required help from people who'd already abandoned her once. But it was also the only chance she had. The first person she needed was Adrian. She sent a note via a street urchin she paid with her last spare coins. "Meet me at the British Museum, reading room, 10 o'clock. Come alone. Trust me one more time." She had no idea if he'd come. No idea if he'd even read the message, or if he'd already begun the process of distancing himself from her as she'd demanded. But she had to try. At 9:30, Evelyn slipped out of her aunt's house through the servants' entrance, avoiding the reporters still camped outside the front door. She wore her plainest dress and a heavy veil, hoping to avoid recognition. The morning streets were crowded enough that she could disappear into the flow of humanity. Washerwomen and clerks and shopkeepers who had no idea who she was and wouldn't care if they did. The British Museum's reading room was nearly empty at this hour. Evelyn chose a table in the corner, partially hidden by tall shelves, and waited with her heart hammering against her ribs. 10 o'clock came and went. Then quarter past. At 10:30, Evelyn accepted that he wasn't coming. She'd asked too much, demanded too much sacrifice. He'd made the sensible choice to protect himself. She was gathering her papers to leave when a shadow fell across her table. "You should be on a ship to New York." Adrian's voice was rough, like he hadn't slept. "Why aren't you?" Evelyn looked up at him and felt her breath catch. He looked terrible, dark circles under his eyes, his cravat slightly askew, his coat wrinkled. The always immaculate Duke of Blackthorn looked like a man who'd been through hell. "Because I found something." She pushed the documents across the table. "Read these." He sat down slowly, picked up the first page, and began to read. She watched his expression change from confusion to shock to fury as the scope of Ashworth's crimes became clear. "Where did you get these?" "Henry. He's been gathering evidence against his father for months, maybe years, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to use it. This is..." Adrian flipped through page after page, his hands shaking. "This is enough to destroy him. Criminal prosecution, public disgrace, everything. If we can make people believe it." "Why wouldn't they believe it? The evidence is clear." "The evidence against me was clear too. Forged letters, false witnesses, manufactured documentation. Ashworth made everyone believe I was a criminal and a whore. He'll do the same with this. He'll claim the documents are forgeries created by you and me to save ourselves." Adrian set down the papers, his expression grim. "So what do? We make it impossible to deny. We don't just present the evidence, we force him to defend himself publicly in a venue where he can't control the narrative." She leaned forward. "There's a parliamentary session next week. Public galleries, journalists, official record. If we can get someone to raise questions about the charitable foundations during that session, force Ashworth to respond under oath, he'll either have to lie, which we can then prove, or admit the truth. No member of Parliament will risk Ashworth's wrath by raising those questions, not without ironclad proof beforehand. Then we give them ironclad proof. We go to every person on Henry's list, show them these documents, convince them that Ashworth can be beaten." She met his eyes. "And we do it together. Not as a duke and a scandal-plagued nobody, but as two people who refuse to let a tyrant win." Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and took her hand. "I thought I'd lost you." "You almost did. I was ready to run, ready to disappear and let you rebuild your life without me." She gripped his hand tighter. "But then I realized something. Running doesn't change anything. It just lets evil men keep doing evil things. And I'm tired of being afraid. What you're proposing is dangerous. If we fail, I'm no worse off than I already am. Ruined, exiled, possibly facing criminal charges. But if we succeed?" She smiled grimly.
We take down the most powerful tyrant in London and prove that courage and truth actually matter. When did you become so fierce? When I stopped trying to survive and started trying to fight. They left the museum separately. Adrian through the front entrance, Evelyn through a side door, and spent the next 2 days executing their plan with the precision of military strategy. First, they approached the people on Henry's list individually, presenting the evidence and making their case. Some refused to listen, too afraid of Ashworth's reach. But others, the ones who'd suffered most under his manipulation, began to see possibility where before they'd seen only power. Lord Pemberton, whose son had been blackmailed into voting against labor reforms, agreed to raise questions in Parliament if they could guarantee protection from retaliation. James Mitchell, a journalist who'd been fired for refusing to suppress a story about factory conditions, agreed to publish the findings if they could provide irrefutable proof. Margaret Thornton, a widow whose husband had been driven to suicide by Ashworth's financial manipulations, agreed to testify about what she knew if it meant bringing him down. One by one, the pieces fell into place. Not quickly and not easily. Every conversation was a battle, every agreement hard-won. But slowly, impossibly, an alliance formed. On the third day, Henry Ashworth appeared at Evelyn's door looking pale and determined. My father knows something is happening. He's been in closed meetings all day, sending urgent messages. He suspects betrayal but doesn't know from where. Henry's voice was steady, despite his obvious fear. I think he suspects me. Then you need to distance yourself from this. We can... No. I'm done being complicit in his crimes. If he suspects me, let him. I'm not backing down now. Henry, if he discovers your involvement, he'll disown me, strip me of my allowance. Maybe worse. Henry smiled without humor. But I'll be able to sleep at night. That's worth more than his approval ever was. The final piece of the plan came from an unexpected source. Victoria Ashworth. She arrived at Evelyn's house late one evening, without announcement or escort, her face hidden beneath a heavy cloak. When the maid showed her into the drawing room, Evelyn almost didn't recognize her. The perfect society beauty looked haggard, her eyes red from crying. I need to speak with you, Victoria said without preamble. Alone. Aunt Marguerite left reluctantly. Evelyn faced Victoria across the drawing room, waiting. I know what you're planning, Victoria said quietly. Henry told me. About the evidence, about Parliament, all of it. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Did you tell your father? No, and I'm not going to. Victoria's hands were shaking. Because he's a monster, and I've known it for years, and I've done nothing to stop him. Why are you here? Because I want to help. Victoria's voice broke. You think I wanted to marry Adrian? You think I enjoyed being paraded around as a prize for good political behavior? My father has been planning my life since I was born. Who I'd marry, what alliances I'd form, how I'd be useful to his ambitions. I've never had a choice about anything. I don't understand. My father destroyed a young man 2 years ago. She stopped, collecting herself. Someone I cared about. He wasn't titled enough, wasn't wealthy enough, wasn't useful enough. So my father manufactured a scandal, ruined him, drove him out of London, and I said nothing, did nothing, let it happen because I was too afraid to fight back. Evelyn felt her anger toward Victoria beginning to shift. What happened to him? He killed himself. The words were barely a whisper. Jumped from London Bridge 3 months after my father destroyed his reputation, and I've lived with that knowledge every day since. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be angry. Be fierce. Victoria met her eyes, and in them Evelyn saw not her enemy, but a fellow prisoner. My father needs to pay for what he's done, not just to you, but to everyone he's ever crushed, and I can help make that happen. How? I have access to his study, his private correspondence. There might be more evidence there, things even Henry doesn't know about. Victoria's voice grew stronger. Let me help you destroy him. Let me do the one brave thing I've failed to do my entire life. If he discovers your betrayal, then I'll face the consequences. But I can't live with myself anymore if I don't try. 2 days before the parliamentary session, their final alliance solidified. Lord Pemberton would raise the questions. Mitchell would publish the story. The witnesses were prepared to testify.
And Victoria had provided additional evidence from her father's private files, letters, ledgers, correspondence that made his guilt impossible to deny. Evelyn met with Adrian in his study the night before, reviewing their strategy one final time. "Tomorrow changes everything," he said quietly. "Either we win and Ashworth falls, or we lose and he destroys us both completely." "I know. You could still leave. Get on a ship, start over somewhere safe. So could you. Apologize to the Ashworths, marry Victoria, save your political career." He smiled slightly. "Neither of us is very good at taking the safe option, are we?" "Apparently not." He pulled her close, and she let herself lean against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. Tomorrow they would face Ashworth's power and fury. Tomorrow they would risk everything on the chance that truth and courage could actually defeat corruption and tyranny. But tonight they had this moment, this quiet certainty that they were fighting for something bigger than themselves. "I love you," Adrian said into her hair. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know that." "I love you too. That's why I'm doing this." "To prove your innocence?" "No. To prove that your faith in me was justified. To prove that choosing honor over expedience actually matters." She pulled back to look at him. "To prove that the world can be different if enough people are brave enough to demand it." The parliamentary session began at 10 o'clock. Evelyn sat in the public gallery with Aunt Marguerite, watching as members filed in and took their seats. Adrian was there, in his hereditary position, looking calm and confident. Lord Ashworth sat in a place of prominence, radiating power and authority, completely unaware of the trap closing around him. The session proceeded through routine business, debates on tariffs, discussions of colonial administration, the mundane machinery of government. Evelyn's hands were clenched so tightly, her fingernails drew blood from her palms. Then Lord Pemberton stood. "I wish to raise a question regarding the charitable foundations overseen by the esteemed Lord Ashworth." The chamber fell silent. Ashworth's expression didn't change, but Evelyn saw his knuckles whiten on the armrest of his seat. "The foundations in question receive substantial public and private funding," Pemberton continued. "Funds meant for orphanages, worker relief, medical care for the poor. I have received allegations suggesting these funds may not have reached their intended recipients." "This is outrageous!" Ashworth was on his feet. "I have served these charitable institutions for decades. My reputation is beyond reproach." "Then you won't mind answering some questions under oath." Pemberton's voice was steady. "For instance, can you account for the sum of £80,000 allocated to the Westminster Orphan Relief Fund in 1848? "I don't carry such details in my head. The accountants show the money was received by the fund, but the orphanage itself has no record of receiving more than £12,000 that year. Where did the remaining £68,000 go?" Ashworth's face was reddening. "This is a witch hunt based on forged documents and malicious rumors." "I have the original ledgers." Adrian stood, holding up a leather-bound book. "Obtained from the Westminster Orphanage itself, signed by their administrator. Witnessed by 3 independent parties. Would you like to examine them?" The chamber erupted in whispers. Ashworth was sputtering, his usual composure cracking. "Those could be forgeries, manufactured by my enemies to discredit me." "Then explain the Bristol Hospital Fund," Pemberton said, "or the Manchester Worker Relief Society, or the half-dozen other institutions that show similar discrepancies." One by one, the evidence was presented. Not just by Pemberton and Adrian, but by other members of Parliament, men who'd been on Henry's list, who'd been waiting for someone else to go first, who now saw their chance to break free of Ashworth's control. The numbers were damning. Hundreds of thousands of pounds meant for the poor and desperate vanished into accounts that traced back to companies Ashworth controlled. The documentation was meticulous, cross-referenced, impossible to dismiss as forgery. Evelyn watched Ashworth's face as his empire crumbled, watched him try to maintain his composure, to bluster and deny and deflect. But the evidence kept coming, wave after wave, until even his staunchest allies were looking uncomfortable. "This session stands adjourned," the speaker finally announced. "Lord Ashworth, you will be expected to answer these allegations formally at the next session. Criminal investigation will commence immediately." The chamber emptied in chaos. Journalists rushed for the doors, desperate to file their stories. Members of Parliament clustered in urgent conversation. and Ashworth stood alone in the center of the room, his power stripped away in a single morning. As Evelyn stood to leave, she saw him look up into the gallery. Their eyes met across the chamber, and in his face she saw hatred so pure it was almost frightening. But she also saw defeat, and that was worth everything. Outside the Parliament building, a crowd had already gathered. News traveled fast in London, and the fall of Lord Ashworth was too spectacular to ignore. Evelyn pushed through the masses with her aunt, trying to reach their carriage. "Miss Carter!" A voice cut through the noise. James Mitchell, the journalist, was forcing his way toward her. "Miss Carter, I need a statement. I have nothing to say. But you were the one who exposed Ashworth's crimes. You're a hero." The word stopped her cold. Hero. Not whore, not social climber, not scheming manipulator. Hero. "I'm not a hero," she said quietly. "I'm just someone who refused to stay quiet while a powerful man committed crimes." "And that's what makes you a hero," Mitchell said. He was scribbling in his notebook. "The Times is running a full retraction tomorrow, apologizing for the false stories about you, acknowledging that you were the victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by Ashworth himself. A bit late for that. Better late than never. And Miss Carter," Mitchell's expression was earnest, "for what it's worth, I'm sorry. We failed you. The press, society, all of us. We believed the lies because they were easier than confronting the truth." Evelyn felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "Make sure you get the story right this time. Not for me, for all the people Ashworth hurt who don't have voices loud enough to be heard." "I will. You have my word." Adrian found her by their carriage, his face flushed with triumph and relief. "We did it," he said, pulling her into his arms despite the watching crowd. "We actually did it. It's not over. He'll fight back. He still has allies, resources. Let him fight. The truth is out now. Criminal investigation, public scandal, parliamentary inquiry. There's no recovering from this." Adrian pulled back to look at her. "And you, Evelyn Carter, just proved that one person's courage can change everything." That evening, as the London papers hit the streets with headlines screaming about Ashworth's fall, Evelyn sat in her aunt's drawing room receiving an endless stream of visitors. People who'd cut her days ago now arrived with apologies and excuses. Society matrons who'd called her a whore now praised her courage. Young ladies who'd mocked her provincial manners now begged for her friendship. She was polite to all of them, but she didn't forgive. The one visitor she wanted came after dark, when the others had finally departed. Henry Ashworth looked exhausted but peaceful. "My father was arrested an hour ago," he said without preamble. "Criminal charges. He'll be tried, probably convicted, certainly ruined." He sat down heavily. "Victoria wanted me to tell you she's sorry, for everything. She helped us win, that's apology enough. She's also leaving England. Once the scandal dies down, she's going to France. Starting over somewhere she can make her own choices." Henry smiled slightly. "Turns out we're both family disappointments now. Are you all right?" "Honestly, I'm terrified. I have no idea what I'm going to do without my father's money and influence. But I'm also—" He paused, searching for words. "I'm free. For the first time in my life, I'm free. And that's worth being terrified for." After he left, Evelyn stood at the window watching the London streets. Somewhere out there, Lord Ashworth was sitting in a cell, his power gone, his crimes exposed. The man who'd seemed untouchable had been brought down by the very people he'd tried to destroy. It felt like victory, but it also felt incomplete, because Ashworth's fall didn't fix the system that had allowed him to rise, didn't change the fact that London society still valued power over principle, status over substance. Didn't guarantee that another tyrant wouldn't rise to take his place, but it was a start. It was proof that the system could be challenged, that courage and truth could win even when the odds seemed impossible. And sometimes that was enough. Adrian arrived shortly after midnight, looking disheveled and wonderful. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Couldn't stay away?" He crossed the room and took her hands. "Evelyn, I know everything is complicated right now. Your reputation is being restored, but slowly. My political position is stronger without Ashworth's opposition, but still precarious. We both have enemies who won't forget what happened." "I know. But I also know that I love you, that I want to build a life with you, not despite the complications, but because of them.
Because you're the only person I've ever met who fights as hard as I do for what's right. He knelt, pulling a small box from his coat. So I'm asking you again, under better circumstances this time. Evelyn Carter, will you marry me? The ring was beautiful, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, elegant, without being ostentatious. Evelyn stared at it, her mind racing. This was everything she'd supposedly been scheming for from the beginning. The Duke, the title, the security, proof that she'd been right to be brave, to fight back, to refuse to accept defeat. But it was also so much more than that. It was a partnership with someone who saw her not as a prize or a scandal, but as an equal. Someone who trusted her judgment, valued her courage, and loved her for exactly who she was. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, and for a moment the whole complicated world fell away, leaving just the two of them and the future they would build together. But outside the window, London continued its endless dance of power and ambition, cruelty and kindness, defeat and victory. The world hadn't changed overnight. Evil hadn't been vanquished forever. But one tyrant had fallen. One woman had refused to stay silent, and one impossible love had survived against all odds. It was a beginning, not an ending. And sometimes that was exactly what the world needed most. The sapphire ring caught the candlelight as Evelyn twisted it absently around her finger, watching dawn break over London through Adrian's study window. They'd stayed up the entire night making plans, not just for their wedding, but for what came after. Because the fall of Lord Ashworth had created a vacuum in London's power structure, and nature abhorred a vacuum. "The trial starts in 3 weeks, Adrian said, reviewing documents at his desk. Ashworth's lawyers are already trying to delay, claiming they need more time to prepare a defense. Let them delay. Every day that passes, more evidence surfaces. Evelyn had been coordinating with the victims of Ashworth's schemes, orphanages, hospitals, workers' relief organizations. Each had stories that made her blood boil. Margaret Thornton found letters yesterday proving Ashworth knew about the factory collapse that killed her husband. He'd been warned the building was unsafe but ordered production to continue anyway. That's manslaughter, possibly murder. That's justice if we can make it stick." Adrian looked at her with something like awe. "You've changed. When I met you, you were brave but uncertain. Now you're angry? Powerful. There's a difference between having courage and knowing how to use it." She crossed to his desk, studying the maps and documents spread across it. "Show me the votes again. For the labor reform bill." He pulled out a chart showing members of Parliament and their positions. "Without Ashworth's opposition, we have 47 confirmed supporters. Need 60 for passage. The remaining 13 are possible but not certain. Who's still resisting? Lord Stirling, Duke of Marlborough, the usual traditionalists who think any reform is dangerous." Adrian tapped names on the chart. "They won't support the bill out of idealism, but they might be persuaded by practical considerations." Such as? Public opinion. The Ashworth scandal has turned London society upside down. People are questioning everything they accepted as truth. If we can show them that reform isn't about destroying tradition, but about building a better future, then we need a public campaign, not just parliamentary debates, but something that reaches ordinary people. Evelyn's mind was already racing. James Mitchell at the Times owes us. We could work with him to publish a series of articles about the real conditions in factories. Not dry statistics, but actual stories. Names, faces, families. The factory owners will fight back. Let them. After Ashworth, the public doesn't trust them anymore. She smiled grimly. We're not fighting with their weapons anymore. We're changing the battlefield entirely. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Mitchell published the first article, a detailed account of 12-year-old Thomas Brennan, who'd lost his arm in a factory accident and been cast out with no compensation, left to beg on the streets. The story included an illustration of Thomas, his vacant sleeve and haunted eyes impossible to ignore. London was horrified. Within days, public sympathy had shifted. Women's groups organized protests outside factories. Churches held special services for exploited workers. Even society matrons, the same ones who'd called Evelyn a whore weeks earlier, began hosting fundraisers for factory reform. The second article featured Sarah Mitchell, a widow whose husband had died from lung disease caused by cotton dust in poorly ventilated workrooms.
She had 5 children and no income. The factory owner had offered her £10 as charity and told her to be grateful. The public outcry was deafening. By the third article, factory owners were scrambling to appear sympathetic. Some announced voluntary improvements. Others pledged donations to worker relief funds. And in Parliament, those wavering votes began to shift. But not everyone was pleased with the changing tide. Caroline Pembroke appeared at Evelyn's door one afternoon, looking furious. "You've made yourself quite the reformer," Caroline said, her voice dripping venom, "using your connection to the Duke to advance your radical agenda. I'm using every resource I have to help people who are suffering. If that makes me radical, I'll wear the label proudly. You're destroying the social order, making people question their betters, encouraging discontent among classes that should accept their station." Evelyn stared at her. "You actually believe that, don't you? That some people are naturally superior and others naturally inferior? That children should die in factories because that's the natural order of things? I believe stability matters more than sentiment. That change is dangerous. That people like you—" Caroline's composure cracked slightly. "People who refuse to know their place undermine everything that makes society function." Society isn't functioning, Caroline. It's failing most of the people in it while pretending everything is fine. Evelyn's voice was firm, but not unkind. "You're terrified because you've built your entire identity on maintaining a system that benefits you at others' expense. But that system is crumbling, and no amount of spite will rebuild it." Caroline's face went pale, then red. "You'll regret this. When chaos comes, when the natural order collapses, you'll understand why we fought so hard to preserve it." "Perhaps, but I'd rather risk chaos than guarantee cruelty." After Caroline left, Aunt Marguerite emerged from the drawing room where she'd been listening. "She's afraid," Marguerite said quietly. "They all are, because you've shown them that power isn't permanent, that even the most established hierarchies can be challenged." "Are you afraid too, Aunt?" Marguerite considered the question. "I'm terrified. Everything I was taught about how the world works is being proven wrong, but I'm also—" She paused. "I'm proud. Of you. Of what you've become." It was the first time her aunt had said anything like that. Evelyn felt unexpected tears burn behind her eyes. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. The wedding is in 10 days, and half of society still doesn't know whether to celebrate you or shun you. We have work to do." The wedding had become more than just a marriage ceremony. It had become a statement, a symbol of everything that had changed in London over the past months. Adrian insisted it be held at St. Paul's Cathedral, public, grand, impossible to ignore. Evelyn wanted something smaller, but she understood the strategic value of the gesture. The guest list became a battleground. Should they invite the people who'd shunned Evelyn during her scandal? The society matrons who'd believed Ashworth's lies? The former allies who'd abandoned them at the first sign of trouble? "Yes," Adrian said firmly, "we invite all of them, not to gloat, but to show that we're building something new, something that doesn't require holding grudges or maintaining resentments." "That's very noble. I'm not sure I'm that forgiving." "You don't have to forgive them, but you do have to show them that you're bigger than their cruelty, that their opinion of you never mattered as much as they thought it did." He was right, though it galled her to admit it. So the invitations went out, to friends and enemies alike, to supporters and skeptics, to everyone who'd watched Evelyn's rise and fall and rise again with fascinated horror. 3 days before the wedding, Lord Ashworth's trial began. The courtroom was packed with journalists, society figures, and ordinary citizens who'd managed to secure seats. Evelyn sat in the front row beside Adrian, watching as the man who'd nearly destroyed her was led to the defendant's box. He looked diminished somehow, smaller, older, stripped of the aura of invincibility that had once surrounded him. The prosecution laid out its case methodically. The embezzled funds, the forged documents, the witness testimony from orphanage administrators, hospital directors, workers who'd been promised relief that never came. Each piece of evidence built upon the last until the weight of Ashworth's crimes was undeniable. His defense was predictable. He'd been deceived by subordinates, misled by accountants, the victim of a complex conspiracy to destroy his reputation. But the evidence was too overwhelming, the documentation too clear. On the second day of testimony, Victoria took the stand. She looked pale but composed, dressed in simple gray with no jewelry. When she swore to tell the truth, her voice didn't waver. "Miss Ashworth," the prosecutor began, "can you describe your father's relationship with the charitable foundations in question?"
He used them as personal bank accounts. Victoria's voice was clear, carrying to every corner of the courtroom. He would attend fundraising events, give impassioned speeches about helping the poor, collect donations, and then funnel most of the money into companies he controlled. In the defendant's box, Ashworth's face went purple. "You lying to..." The judge's gavel cracked down. "You will have your chance to speak, Lord Ashworth." "Miss Ashworth, continue." "I have copies of his private ledgers, account numbers, transfer records, everything showing exactly where the money went." Victoria's hands were shaking, but her voice remained steady. "I'm providing them as evidence because I'm tired of being complicit in his crimes." "You ungrateful..." Ashworth was on his feet, apoplectic with rage. "I gave you everything: position, wealth, a future." "You gave me a cage." Victoria finally looked at him, and in her eyes was a lifetime of accumulated pain. "And I'm done living in it." The courtroom erupted. Journalists scribbled frantically, society matrons gasped behind their fans, and Evelyn felt a surge of respect for the woman she'd once considered her enemy. The trial continued for 5 more days. Each day brought new revelations, new evidence, new testimony that painted Ashworth not as a pillar of society, but as a predator who'd built his empire on stolen money and broken lives. On the final day, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. "Guilty on all counts." The words echoed through the courtroom. Ashworth slumped in his chair, the fight finally gone out of him. His lawyers immediately filed appeals, but everyone knew they were futile gestures. He would be sentenced to prison, his title stripped, his wealth confiscated to repay his victims. The tyrant had fallen, and this time he wouldn't rise again. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. When Evelyn and Adrian emerged, they erupted in cheers. Not the polite applause of society functions, but genuine, heartfelt celebration. Working men and women, factory laborers, orphans who'd been cheated of care, the people Ashworth had victimized, celebrating his downfall. James Mitchell pushed through the crowd with his notebook. "Miss Carter, or should I say, Your Grace to be, do you have a statement about the verdict?" Evelyn looked at the crowd, at the faces of people who'd suffered while society looked away. Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about building a system where people like Lord Ashworth can't succeed in the first place, where power doesn't excuse cruelty, where the vulnerable are protected instead of exploited. She took Adrian's hand. "That's the work we're committed to, not just for ourselves, but for everyone." The cheers grew louder. Mitchell was scribbling furiously, and Evelyn felt something shift inside her. The final transformation from the uncertain girl who'd accepted a dare at a ball to the woman who'd brought down a tyrant and was now preparing to change the system that had created him. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, as if London itself had decided to celebrate. St. Paul's Cathedral filled with guests, some invited, some who simply showed up hoping to witness history. The society matrons who'd shunned Evelyn sat beside factory workers she'd interviewed for the articles. Dukes and dustmen, ladies and laundresses, all crammed into the same sacred space. Evelyn stood in the vestibule, adjusting her veil with shaking hands. Her dress was ivory silk, simple but elegant, with lace from her mother's wedding gown incorporated into the sleeves. Aunt Marguerite fussed over the train while Margaret Thornton, the widow whose testimony had helped convict Ashworth, held her bouquet. "Are you ready?" Marguerite asked. Evelyn thought about everything that had led to this moment, the dare that had started it all, the humiliation and scandal, the choice between running and fighting, the evidence that had brought down a tyrant, every moment of fear and courage that had brought her here. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." The organ music swelled. The doors opened, and Evelyn walked down the aisle toward Adrian, who stood at the altar looking at her like she was the only person in the entire cathedral. But what made her breath catch wasn't his expression. It was the faces in the pews. Caroline Pembroke, looking begrudgingly impressed. Victoria Ashworth, smiling with genuine warmth. Henry Ashworth, tears streaming down his face. Lord Pemberton and the other members of Parliament who'd found their courage because she'd found hers first. And in the back pews, standing because there weren't enough seats, were the ordinary people, the factory workers, the orphans, the women who'd been told they didn't matter, the men who'd been told to accept their lot, the children who'd been promised a better future and were finally beginning to believe it might arrive. She was marrying a duke, yes, becoming a duchess, but she was also becoming something more important, a symbol of what was possible when courage met opportunity, when principle refused to bend to power. The ceremony was beautiful and traditional, but when the bishop asked Adrian to state his vows, he departed from the script. "I promise to stand beside you," Adrian said, his voice carrying through the cathedral. "Not above you, not ahead of you, but beside you. I promise to fight for what's right, even when it's difficult, to use whatever power I have in service of those who have none, and to never forget that the greatest gift you gave me wasn't your hand in marriage, but your example of what true courage looks like." There wasn't a dry eye in the house. When it was Evelyn's turn, she looked into Adrian's eyes and said the words she'd been preparing since the night he'd proposed. "I promise to challenge you when you're wrong, support you when you're right, and stand with you always. I promise to use whatever position I gain through this marriage, not for personal advancement, but for the service of others. And I promise to never stop fighting for a world where love and courage matter more than power and fear." The bishop declared them married. The organ thundered to life, and as they walked back down the aisle together, Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn, Evelyn caught sight of the tapestry hanging above the entrance. Saint, Paul preaching to the people, calling them to live by faith rather than fear. She'd never been particularly religious, but in that moment she understood what it meant to believe in something bigger than yourself, to fight for it, to sacrifice for it, to build it, stone by stone, even when the odds seemed impossible. The reception was held at Adrian's townhouse, transformed for the occasion into a space that somehow accommodated both aristocrats and factory workers. There was champagne for those who wanted it, and ale for those who didn't, delicate canapes and hearty meat pies, chamber music and folk songs. It shouldn't have worked. By all the rules of London society, it should have been a disaster. But somehow, in the warmth of celebration and the wake of Ashworth's fall, the barriers that usually divided people seemed less solid. A countess found herself in conversation with a seamstress about working conditions. A factory owner actually listened, as a worker explained the dangers of 12-hour shifts. A society beauty discovered she had things in common with an orphanage director. Not everyone mingled. Some of the old guard clustered in corners, disapproving and uncomfortable. But their discomfort was their problem, not Evelyn's. Henry Ashworth approached her as she stood watching the unlikely gathering. "Quite a revolution you've started," he said with a smile. "It's not a revolution. It's just—" Evelyn searched for the right word. "It's just people choosing to see each other as people instead of categories." "That might be the most revolutionary thing of all." Henry's expression grew serious. "Victoria asked me to give you something." He handed her a letter. Evelyn opened it to find Victoria's elegant handwriting. "Dear Evelyn, by the time you read this, I'll be in France, beginning the life I should have claimed years ago. I wanted to thank you for showing me that courage was possible, for proving that women don't have to accept the futures men plan for us. You were never my enemy. You were my wake-up call. And while I can never undo the cruelty I showed you, I can promise to spend my life trying to be half as brave as you've been. May your marriage be everything mine would never have been, a partnership of equals built on respect and honesty." With admiration and apology, Victoria Evelyn folded the letter carefully, feeling something like forgiveness settling in her chest. "Tell her I wish her well," she said to Henry. "Tell her she's braver than she thinks." As the reception continued into the evening, Adrian pulled Evelyn onto the dance floor. It wasn't the grand ballroom where they'd first waltzed, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the music, the movement, the sense of having come full circle from that first reckless dare to this moment of hard-won triumph. "Do you remember what you told me?" Adrian murmured as they turned. "That first night, when I asked why you'd really approached me. I said it was a dare, and that you were tired of being invisible, tired of knowing your place." He smiled. "Mission accomplished, I'd say." "We accomplished it together." "Together," he agreed, "just like everything else from now on." As midnight approached, the guests began to depart. The society matrons climbed into their carriages, heading back to townhouses and country estates.
The working people walked home through London streets, discussing what they'd witnessed, what it might mean for the future. Evelyn stood on the steps of the townhouse, watching them go, feeling the weight of the sapphire ring on her finger and the heavier weight of responsibility on her shoulders.
What are you thinking?
Adrian joined her, wrapping an arm around her waist. That this is just the beginning. Ashworth is gone. The labor reform bill will pass, but the system that created him is still there. The same prejudices, the same hierarchies, the same willingness to sacrifice the vulnerable for the comfort of the powerful. Then we keep fighting. We use our position, our resources, our voices to change what we can. It could take years, decades. We might not live to see the world we're trying to build.
Probably not, but someone will.
Someone will live in a world where children don't die in factories, where courage matters more than birth, where a girl from Yorkshire can approach a duke at a ball and not face destruction for daring to be bold. He turned her to face him. We're not fighting for ourselves anymore, Evelyn. We're fighting for everyone who comes after us. She thought about that, about the children not yet born who might inherit a better world because she and Adrian had refused to accept the one they'd been given. About the girls who'd read about her story and think, if she could change things, maybe I can too. Then we'd better get started, she said. 2 weeks later, the labor reform bill passed Parliament by a margin of 8 votes. It banned child labor under the age of 12, limited working hours, required safety standards in factories, and established compensation for workers injured on the job. It wasn't perfect. It didn't solve everything. But it was a start. The day the bill became law, Evelyn and Adrian visited the factory where young Thomas Brennan had lost his arm. They didn't announce their arrival, didn't make it a spectacle. They simply walked through, observing the conditions, talking to workers, seeing for themselves whether the new regulations were being implemented. The factory owner, a different man now, the previous owner having sold after the public outcry, greeted them nervously. Everything is in compliance, Your Grace. We've installed ventilation systems, limited shifts to 10 hours, hired safety inspectors. Good, Adrian said. But we're not here to check on you. We're here to talk to them. He gestured to the workers who'd stopped their machines to watch, to the people the law is meant to protect. They spent 3 hours there, listening to stories, taking notes, understanding what had changed and what still needed changing. When they finally left, Evelyn's mind was already working on the next steps. Education, she said as they rode home. The children not working in factories need somewhere to go. Schools that don't require tuition. Books that teach them more than just religious texts. That will be an even harder fight than labor reform. I know, but it's the next necessary one. Adrian laughed, a sound of pure joy and admiration. I married a revolutionary. You married someone who refuses to accept that the world can't be better. There's a difference. Is there? She considered. Perhaps not. The months that followed were filled with work. They established a foundation using the money recovered from Ashworth's fraud, providing education for working-class children, medical care for factory workers, support for orphans and widows. They published more articles, organized more campaigns, pushed for more reforms. Not everything succeeded. They faced setbacks and defeats, opposition from entrenched interests who saw any change as a threat. But they also found allies in unexpected places, former enemies who'd found their own courage, young people inspired by their example, ordinary citizens who decided they, too, could fight for change. A year after their wedding, Evelyn stood in the same ballroom where she'd first approached Adrian and announced a new initiative, a school for girls from working-class families, funded by the foundation, offering education equivalent to what wealthy families provided their daughters. Because, she told the assembled crowd, courage requires knowledge, change requires education, and the future requires that we stop telling half the population that their only value lies in obedience and silence. The announcement was met with both applause and outrage, exactly as she'd expected. But the school opened 6 months later, filled with 40 girls who'd never dreamed they'd have such an opportunity. On the first day, Evelyn walked through the classrooms, watching young faces bent over books, absorbing knowledge, beginning to understand their own potential. In one room, a teacher was leading a discussion about Mary Wollstonecraft. In another, girls were learning mathematics and science. In a third, they debated politics and philosophy. Look at them.
Adrian said quietly, standing beside her. They're going to change the world. They're going to have the chance to change it, Evelyn corrected. Whether they take it is up to them. Just like you had a choice. At that first ball, when Caroline dared you to approach me, you could have refused, could have stayed safe and invisible. I was never really given a choice. The dare was an excuse, but the decision to be bold, that was always mine. And now hundreds of girls will have the same chance to make that decision. To be bold. To refuse to accept the limitations others place on them. Adrian took her hand. That's your legacy, Evelyn. Not just bringing down Ashworth, or marrying a duke, or passing reforms. It's this. Giving other people the courage to claim their own power. She looked at him, at the man who'd risked everything to stand beside her, and felt gratitude so profound it almost hurt. Our legacy, she corrected. We built this together. Together, he agreed. Years later, when historians wrote about the reforms that had transformed England in the mid-19th century, they would focus on the labor laws and education initiatives, the fall of Lord Ashworth, and the rise of a new political consciousness. They would analyze voting patterns and economic trends, policy decisions, and parliamentary debates. But they would sometimes mention, almost as a footnote, the girl from Yorkshire who'd walked into a ballroom and asked a duke to dance, who'd faced down scandal and humiliation and emerged not broken but stronger, who'd proven that courage and conviction could challenge even the most entrenched power structures. Some called her a hero. Others called her a radical. She rejected both labels, preferring instead to think of herself as simply someone who'd refused to accept that the world couldn't change. On her 40th birthday, surrounded by friends and family in the same townhouse where she'd married Adrian, Evelyn looked around at what they'd built together. The foundation that had helped thousands, the schools that had educated generations, the laws that had saved countless lives, the children she and Adrian had raised to believe that privilege came with responsibility, that power was meant for service, that the measure of a life was what you gave, not what you took. Any regrets? Adrian asked, pulling her aside from the celebration. She thought about the question, about the girl she'd been. Uncertain, afraid, desperate to prove herself. About the woman she'd become, confident in her convictions, unafraid of opposition, secure in her purpose. Not one, she said truthfully, except maybe that I didn't ask you to dance sooner. He laughed and pulled her close. We had exactly the right timing. Any sooner, and we might not have been ready for each other. Any later, and Ashworth might have destroyed us both before we could fight back. Do you think we made a difference? Really? Look around. Adrian gestured to the crowd. Former factory workers now owning their own businesses. Girls from their first school class now teaching in schools of their own. Young people whose parents had been saved by the labor reforms, who'd grown up in a world slightly less cruel than the one they'd inherited. We didn't change everything, but we changed something, and that something changed more things, and those things changed others. That's how revolution actually works, not in grand gestures, but in accumulated small victories. From across the room, a young woman approached, perhaps 20, with bright eyes and confident bearing. She wore a simple but well-made dress and carried herself with the poise of someone who'd been taught she mattered. Your Grace, I wanted to thank you. The young woman curtsied, but her eyes met Evelyn's directly. I was in your first school class. Because of what I learned there, I'm now studying medicine at the university. I'm going to be a doctor. That's wonderful, Evelyn said warmly. What's your name? Sarah. Sarah Brennan. She smiled. My brother Thomas lost his arm in a factory accident when I was small. Your reforms came too late to save him, but they saved other children. And the education you provided gave me the chance to help people the way you helped us. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. Your brother, is he well? He manages a factory now, not working in one, managing one, making sure the safety regulations are followed, that workers are treated fairly. He says he learned the value of such things the hard way. After Sarah left, Evelyn stood quietly, letting the significance of the moment wash over her. This was what change looked like. Not dramatic overnight transformation, but steady accumulation of better choices, braver decisions, more just outcomes. As the celebration continued around them, Evelyn and Adrian slipped away to the study where they'd planned their campaign against Ashworth so many years ago. The room was the same, but everything else had changed. Do you remember what you told me? Evelyn said. looking at the maps and documents that now covered the walls. Not battle plans, but blueprints for schools, proposals for new legislation, letters from people they'd helped. That first night at the musicale, when you broke your alliance with Ashworth, I said some things matter more than politics, that you were one of them. You were wrong about one thing. She turned to face him. I wasn't more important than the politics. I was part of them. Because politics is just another word for how we organize our lives together, how we decide what matters, who has power, what we owe each other. When did you become a philosopher? When I realized that the personal is always political, that choosing courage in my own life was inseparable from fighting for a more courageous world. She moved to the window, looking out at the London streets. That girl who accepted a dare, she thought she was just proving something to people who looked down on her. She had no idea she was starting a revolution. Adrian joined her at the window. And if you could go back and tell her what was coming, the scandal, the pain, the fight, I'd tell her it was worth it. Every moment of fear, every sacrifice, every impossible choice. Because on the other side of all that suffering was this, a life of purpose, a partnership of equals, a world slightly better than the one we inherited. She took his hand. I'd tell her to be brave, and that being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and doing it anyway. Below them, London glittered in the twilight, a city of millions, most of whom would never know Evelyn Carter's name, but many of whom lived better lives because she'd refused to stay silent. Because she'd walked into a ballroom and asked a duke to dance. Because she'd chosen courage when it would have been easier to choose safety. The dare that had started it all had seemed so small at the time, a petty challenge from petty people, designed to humiliate her. But that single moment of reckless courage had cascaded into something far larger than anyone could have imagined. Because that's how change happened. Not through grand plans or perfect strategies, but through ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Through small acts of defiance that accumulated into movements. Through one person's refusal to accept the world as it was, inspiring others to imagine the world as it could be. Come on, Adrian said, pulling her back toward the celebration. Our guests are waiting. Let them wait a moment longer. Evelyn stood at the window, looking out at the city she'd changed and that had changed her, feeling the weight of the past and the promise of the future balanced perfectly in the present moment. She'd been a girl who didn't know her place, who'd ask questions instead of accepting answers, who dared to dream that courage and conviction could matter more than power and fear. And she'd been right. Not because the world had suddenly become perfect, but because she'd proven that perfection wasn't necessary. Progress was enough. Justice was possible. Change was within reach for anyone brave enough to claim it. Somewhere in London tonight, another young woman would face an impossible choice, would be told to know her place, accept her lot, bow to power. And maybe, just maybe, she would think of Evelyn Carter, the girl who'd asked a duke to dance and change the world, and find the courage to choose differently. That was legacy. That was revolution. And it was more than enough. Evelyn turned from the window, took Adrian's hand, and walked back into the light and warmth of their celebration, ready for whatever battles tomorrow would bring. Because there would always be more battles, more fights, more moments requiring courage. But she would face them the same way she'd faced everything since that first dance, with conviction, with purpose, and with the absolute certainty that a single act of courage could change the world. Even if that act was as simple as refusing to be invisible. Even if it started with a dare. Even if the whole world said it was impossible.